This video is sponsored by World Anvil.
That's better. And honestly, that's a lot better too. Things are really starting to come together. Apologies if my voice is a little hoarse. I just shot my Halloween video. I'm shooting a little bit out of order right now. I'm really excited for you to see that video. But it did take a lot of time and took a lot out of me, so my voice might be a little more gravelly than it usually is. Safety tools are the methods we use to make our players feel comfortable during a game. They're essential to employ in some form because we don't want our players to feel uncomfortable. That's not fun for anybody. If you disagree, I don't know what to tell you. I don't want the people at my tables to not have fun. The primary use of safety tools is usually to make sure that certain content does not appear during a D&D game, at least without warning. For example, let's say that one player has an aversion to eye stuff. Anything that happens around eyes, they don't want to think about. They don't want to have it described at the table. You as the Dungeon Master need to know that, because if you're describing how the player takes down the Beholder or the Cyclops, you want to make sure that you do so in a way that does not make the player who does not like eye stuff to feel uncomfortable. And that example is not even that far outside the realm of possibility for standard D&D. There's a pretty iconic hero in this game whose catchphrase is, "Go for the eyes." For many of us, we would not think of that as a pressure point for a player, but for some people it is. Safety tools can cover lots of areas, like behavior at the table, descriptions of scenes or imagery, language, content, all sorts of things. But you might think, I don't need to use those. I'm just running a fun adventure game. We're not going to cover any serious subjects. But safety tools also make sure that all players are on the same page. For example, if one player wants to play a character with the backstory of being a slave because they think that's a cool backstory, it makes them feel like Spartacus, it's worth knowing if somebody else at the table feels like that's actually not fun escapism, that if they're going to have slavery in the game, it should actually be handled in some sort of meaningful way, and if it's not going to be, maybe it shouldn't appear at all. Like, maybe slavery isn't just fun window dressing for your adventurer. Maybe it's an actual serious subject and shouldn't be taken so lightly. Now, one of the misconceptions about safety tools from people who don't feel like using them is usually that they get in the way, that they slow down your game. But safety tools are like seatbelts. You put them in place when you begin your trip together, and if everything goes according to plan, you never need to think about them again. And then if something does start to go wrong in the game, if somebody does cross into territory that was already discussed as being off limits or meant to be handled with care during your session 0, then just like a seatbelt, the safety tools come into play, and they make sure that you and your players can get through the incident unscathed. Everybody wins if you use safety tools. The question is, what tools are right for you? I'll admit, as somebody who's been playing online exclusively for several years now, my experience with safety tools has been kind of limited to the things that can either be put in place before the campaign begins, or what can be done verbally during a session, because we don't really have the opportunity for physical handouts like X cards or traffic light cards. So this is not a comprehensive list of every safety tool out there. This is just my experience with the ones that I've used at my virtual tables in the past 2.5 years. I'm not an expert in the tools I haven't used, so if you have some that you'd like to discuss that do not appear in this video, like for example the traffic cards or the X cards, I would love to know how they worked for you, so let me know in the comments below. This is something that I've started using more and more as I pitch campaigns to my players, especially if I'm running a pre-published adventure and I know what content is potentially going to be a source of pressure. Now, these adventures can be adapted however we want to, so there are some things that I will just remove if I don't care for them. Like, for example, the ableist material in Curse of Strahd. But there are some things in Curse of Strahd that I would never cut because they're actually extremely important to how I run this adventure. I run Strahd like he is a gaslighting predator, because that's what he is. And that's the experience that I want to try to explore with my players if they're open to it. So I make sure they know before the game begins that's what they're going to be dealing with. I don't have to tell them exactly what's going to happen. I don't have to tip my hand in any way. But it's still really valuable to tell your players what you expect to appear in the campaign. I'll put the content warnings in the pitch packet or the one sheet, whatever it is I give my players in advance of the game. But how do I know what's going to need a content warning versus just being an assumption of D&D? After all, we all assume there's going to be violence and murder in our D&D games, right? Where's the line, and how do we know where it is? Well, that's where this next safety tool becomes extremely useful. The next one I've started using is the TTRPG consent form. I use it in 2 main ways. The first is, just like I said, I will actually go through the form and look for things that are represented in the adventure that I find to be something that can't really be changed, or that I wouldn't really be as willing to change unless there was some serious pushback. For example, in Curse of Strahd, there is some discussion of mental health that I was not on board with, so I don't include that in my game. There are some references to self-harm that I include, but I'm open to removing at the wishes of the players. And as I said, the behavior of the villain I'm very upfront about, and that's the story I'm interested in telling if we go with that adventure. And something like draining blood will absolutely appear in my Curse of Strahd game in some form. So I use the consent form as a bit of a guide for what things in the campaign should be brought up. But I'll also give the consent form to my players in advance. Now I have a couple of issues with the form, and at some point I might put together my own, but I'm not ready for that right now. My issues with this form is that I don't really know if it gives the players enough information to make an informed decision, specifically about the stuff that they're on the fence about. Basically, the consent form lists a bunch of items that are potentially things that people might have an issue with, and it says, do you not want this to appear in the game? Are you okay with it maybe appearing? Or are you totally fine with it appearing? Green, yellow, red light. Now everyone knows what the green light means. We all are on the same page about that. Green light, it's fine to be in the game. Red light, not going to be in the game at all. And when I hand this consent form off, I will usually have some red items marked. There is some content that will never appear at my gaming table, no matter whether a player requests it. Sexual assault, for example, is always marked as red, not appearing in the game, when I give the form to my players. That way, they know right away where my limits are as well. But I still have kind of an issue with the yellow category. What does the yellow light mean in this context? This isn't an issue with the traffic light cards. This is an issue specific to giving this form to people and not explaining what yellow represents. Does yellow mean I'm okay with it happening as long as it is only done by bad guys and we are going to then fight those people? Does yellow mean I'm okay with it being referenced, but I don't want it to be depicted on screen, as it were, on camera? Does yellow mean I would be very reluctant to have it appear? And even more than that, I think new players don't really understand the power of D&D sometimes. The problem with giving people a checklist in advance is that you don't really know if people are going to have the same feelings as they are when they actually get to the table. And that can manifest in two different ways. One is that somebody might say something is okay, and then they get to the table and it starts happening and they realize, nope, never mind, this actually does freak me out. Playing D&D makes my imagination go wild. What we're dealing with is too heavy for me. I'd rather we stop. That's actually totally fine. Anybody can make that judgment at any point, and the next safety tool will help people deal with that. But the other thing that D&D can do is be extremely cathartic. For example, you might not want there to be gaslighters in your D&D game. Unless I tell you, this whole adventure is about fighting and killing one. Does that change things? I think it might. I don't know for sure, but it might. And I don't think new players have enough context to realize that if they mark it as yellow, maybe that means I want this to be in the game only if I can kill it, for example. If I can deal with this in a profound way. That's why I use the TTRPG consent form as a jumping off point for subjects. I don't think it can do the job all on its own, at least not the version that I've seen. The one that I use is in the description below. If you know of others that you find are better, please let me know about those as well.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Are you tired of your humdrum life? Are you bored by your normal, everyday interactions? Do you wish the world was a kinder, gentler place? Yeah, me too. Anyway, let's play D&D together. Now, I'm just a disembodied voice, so I can't interact with dice or paper notes. But luckily for me, I use World Anvil to run my games. It's a fantastic way to keep track of lore, characters, locations, and events. And you can use World Anvil to support any number of systems and have an absolutely spectacular time with your friends. With World Anvil, you can create a marvelous world that isn't boring or sad, but awesome and incredible. Visit worldanvil.com and use the promo code SUPERGEEK to save 40% off of any annual membership. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring the video.
The third safety tool I want to discuss is the one I hinted at just a moment ago. How do you interrupt the game? How do you break the flow and talk about something that's happening at the table? Maybe it's not something that was discussed during session 0, but you want to discuss it now. It's a very simple phrase, and specifically Mike Shea has been talking about this a lot on the Sly Flourish channel recently. Pause for a moment. During session 0, you make sure that all players know that at any point they have the chance to say, pause for a moment. You can do this for lots of reasons. You can say, I'm not comfortable with what's happening, or you can say, hey, I feel like we're kind of frustrated. Can we just take a moment and make sure we know what the plan is. There are lots of reasons to pause the game, and having that option available to everyone is really valuable. As somebody who plays remotely and digitally, being able to pause is vital. I can't really give my players an X card. I could ask them to do like an X motion with their arms, but what if their camera's not working because the internet is bad? Which, by the way, is very often the case. Giving them verbal permission to say, stop, let's take a moment, it can really help save your games. The fourth safety tool I want to discuss today is something I've talked about on this channel before, but I didn't really tell you that it was a safety tool. That is speaking out of character. Very deliberately taking a moment to talk about the difference between what you as a player feel and what you as a character feel. This is not as robust a tool as pause for a moment or consent forms or content warnings. This is much more limited to what's happening with characters themselves. Speaking out of character doesn't really help resolve, say, a graphic depiction of violence that you're not comfortable with. But it can really help with interpersonal content. If your characters are coming into friction and you're heading toward some sort of interaction that is going to make people feel uncomfortable, or you're worried it might, or if something's happening and you know that you're heading into territory that you previously said you weren't okay with, being able to stop and speak out of character is valuable. It's really just another version of pause for a moment, but without necessarily having to pause. It's almost like turning on the director's commentary. You can say something like, "My player stares at you and tears well up in their eyes. I'm fine, by the way, this is just what my character feels. I am not upset with anyone at the table." Having that option to switch on the commentary when you need to is really helpful. You don't need to do it with everything you say, but making sure that you're doing it every once in a while can be a really cool way to keep the game flowing. And again, this is something that I've talked about before. If you want to know more about that, check out the video. Those, again, are the safety tools that I have really used over the past few years, which, again, primarily have been limited to the stuff that we can do verbally, or that we can do in advance. But I am hoping to maybe run some in-person games sometime next year, so I am going to start looking for some in-person options. Things that I can do at my table, things like the X card, the traffic light cards. So if you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments below. And maybe in a couple years, I'll make another version of this video that has more options included. In the meantime, if you like this video and you want to support the channel, there are 4 great ways to do that. You can subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about new videos as soon as they come out. You can join my Patreon and support the channel financially. Every dollar amount really helps the channel. You can join my Discord and be a part of a cool community talking about awesome D&D stuff. And you can sign up for my newsletter to get some occasional updates about what I've got going on. Until next time, play fair and have fun.